The United States and Russia stand face to face, sharing a common frontier. Here is the Soviet Union as I saw it from an American plane flying over the United States. Beyond that point is the Soviet Union, 20-odd miles away, Big Diomede Island, and a few miles farther, the mainland of Soviet Russia. I am standing here at Tin City, Alaska, near Cape Prince of Wales, farthest west point on the American continent, even west of Hawaii. Here on the hills above us, our radar stations are constantly watching air activity on the other side of the strait. Here, it is one day of the week. Over there, it is another, because the international date line runs between. A difference of dates, a difference of ideas. The line is the same a few miles away across this quiet sea. What does this new state, Alaska, mean to the defense of the United States? Is all well? Can we rest secure? These are the questions we must ask here on American soil, 5 minutes jet flight from the Soviet Union. What is the strategic importance of this vast new state, Alaska? How is it guarded? In the north, by just one battalion of Eskimo National Guardsmen, an area 4 or 5 times as big as Oklahoma, and only 600 men. Uniform, rifle, radio, binoculars are furnished by the government to this 1st Scout Battalion, 297th Infantry, Alaska National Guard. A regular Army man, Major Lawrence Flanagan, was advisor to the battalion. Up above the Arctic Circle, on the coast, facing the Soviet Union, he hears a report from a scout, perhaps something the scout, in uniform because of the Major's visit, has recently seen.
Major Flanagan, you're the Army officer in charge of the ground defenses in this whole northwestern part of Alaska. What are these scouts that I've just seen?
Well, these scouts are part of the 1st Scout Battalion of the Alaska National Guard, which is part of the overall Army National Guard system. Now, we have approximately 600 men scattered throughout 30-some villages in northwestern and northern Alaska.
Well, how many square miles do they cover?
Well, our area of responsibility is between 200 and 250,000 square miles.
Well, if my figuring is right, that's about one man for every 400 square miles.
It's a great deal of territory. Of course, this also includes the offshore islands, Little Diomede, King Island, and St. Lawrence Island.
Well, how does the Scout Battalion function exactly? What's its purpose?
Well, the purpose, of course, is based upon their location. The people live out here. This is where they spend their lives, and they are, of course, familiar with the ground and the countryside, and their function is, of course, in their being able to operate out here on a normal basis.
Sergeant Kiwana is the Eskimo hunter commanding this particular unit of the Scout Battalion, and I had the pleasure of meeting and talking to him.
Sergeant Kiwana, when you're out there on the ice pack looking for seal or hunting whale or walking along the beach here, what do you look for as a scout?
When we're out on the ice, we always look for anything unusual, like boats, aircraft, or along the beach. We look for anything unusual that is drifted along the shore.
Well, when you find it, what do?
We send it to headquarters at Nome, sir.
And then headquarters, of course, reports to Army headquarters.
Yes, sir.
Well, have you yourself seen anything of interest here?
And not lately, sir.
Well, in other days, have you...
Yes, sir.
What?
Aircrafts,
And you immediately report. How do you report?
We report them by the radio, sir.
What happens when an Eskimo scout out on the ice pack observes a plane or anything else and reports by radio? The report comes here. It comes to the Alaska Defense Command near Anchorage, goes on the plotting board of an operations room such as this in the 10th Air Force. A radio operator has taken down the information and another airman chalks it up on the big plexiglass sheet where everything happening around the Alaskan borders is constantly watched. Senior officers of the U.S. Air Force are on night and day duty watching the ever-changing picture, just as somewhere across the little strip of water that separates us from Russia, others are watching, officers in different uniforms. Service at the big Elmendorf base outside Anchorage is pleasant. But for the men assigned to operations at the headquarters, work is serious and important. We went far north to Point Barrow for another phase of the defense system. Among the mountains and along that bleak North Arctic coast, bound except for a short period in midsummer by the ice pack, are distant early warning stations, the DEW line. The stations watch, detect, report on all planes over the Arctic. Information is then evaluated by Air Force officers and transmitted down to Alaska Defense Command and the North American Air Defense Command at Colorado Springs. The big stations are tied in with auxiliary stations to make a kind of radar fence along the whole Arctic shore of the continent. Until Alaska's BMEWS, the ballistic missile warning system, is completed in the near future, the DEW line is our chief source of knowledge for what's happening in the Arctic skies. Up in this farthest north area, it is extraordinary to see a tractor, because every scrap of wood, every nut and bolt must either be brought by an airplane or by a ship that can slide inside the ice pack for only 30 or 40 days a year. These Arctic towns must get any heavy material, the big machinery, ordered a year in advance. The oil drums, which are used to heat the installations, are dragged around by tractors because ordinary trucks are not much good in the sand or the snow. But when the oil is burned, there is no use for the drums, no use for any old machinery, in fact, and you find the Arctic shore littered with empty barrels and rusting machinery. The DEW line installations look businesslike, and they are closed to all unauthorized personnel. In this farthest north area, the radar machines are conspicuous. For the men, mostly civilians at high pay, it is a life without families, no drinking, little expense, and only the comradeship of other isolated men. The stations are run by civilians of the Federal Electric Company with Air Force supervision. By civilians and Air Force officers, the job gets done to spot any planes which may approach the shores of this 49th state. The trucks brought by plane or ship make the area a busy place, but one wonders about the importance of the DEW line if the threat today is missiles. And, well, as one who has seen an old-fashioned 2,000-mile-an-hour rocket burst in the sky over his head, I wonder. Anchorage is the heart of Alaskan defense. This is no secret to any possible unfriendly foreign characters, if there are any such. The U.S. Army has a large base, Fort Richardson. When I went there, I found officers who had been with me at the same place and the same time in those long-ago days. GAFSA, El Guitar, McNassee, Omaha Beach on that extraordinary morning. And it was good for an old war correspondent to be with the Army again. Major General John H. Michaelis of Korea fame was commander of the Army in Alaska. It seemed to me that he did not have any big airborne force to move quickly over this huge area next door to the Soviet Union. But to discuss the Army's role in Alaska defense, I talked to Colonel Willard Pearson, Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations and Training. Colonel Pearson, as an Army man, how do you see the strategic importance of Alaska?
Well, I think Alaska is a very strategic area in the defense of the free world, and particularly the Western Hemisphere. It's my belief that we've overlooked the strategic importance of the far north and Alaska in particular. And this strategic importance stems from a lot of factors, and particularly the matter of geography. Now, if we'd look at a polar projection of the globe, we'd find that distances from Alaska, for example, into the heartlands of Europe or Eurasia would be considerably shorter than from the United States. And in the age in which we're moving, the missile, the satellite, and the jet airplane, why, these shorter distances have great strategic significance. It's my feeling and belief that should we have another war, and I'd be the last to hope that we would, the Arctic Ocean might very well become the Mediterranean of World War III because of our increasing ability to operate in the north, such as here in Alaska. We can shoot over it, travel across it, or travel underneath it with our new, for example, the Polaris submarine.
I've been impressed by the fact that standing on the beach at Cape Prince of Wales, I was so near Russia, only 30 or 40 miles away. What is the problem of defending Alaska from invasion?
Well, that's a good question. The Alaska is really the back door into Siberia or Russia. And our problem here in Alaska is one of besting the terrain, the mountains, the undefended coastline. You may know that we have 26,000 miles of coastline in Alaska, and the problem is tremendous. From the Army standpoint, we've got to lick it or solve it by developing highly trained mobile forces that we've got centrally located that can react to any threat along this coastline.
Does the shortage of troops here mean that Alaska is not regarded as possibly valuable to a possible enemy?
Well, I think, Mr. McVeigh, we've got to look at it from the total defense picture worldwide and deploy and position our forces in relation to the enemy threat. I do not think that Alaska has been downgraded its strategic importance, and the forces that we have are in relation to the threat that exists. Now, I think that it's difficult to satisfy a military man as to the size and number of his forces, and I would certainly like to see more here.
Every commander would want more forces.
Every commander, of course, would like to have additional forces. And
well, would it be valuable to a possible enemy as a base, Alaska?
Well, I think it would, from a number of reasons. I think one of the most important is psychological. Assuming, for example, that the enemy did land on one of the most bleak coastline of Alaska.
As the Japanese did
that's right.
in the last war.
Now, an enemy could proclaim to the world that she's actually invaded U.S. soil. Well, think of the tremendous reaction in the continental United States to this. Also, to the reaction to the uncommitted nations of the world. They could very well be on the fence, and such a statement as this could topple them into the side of our enemy. So it has great psychological factor from that standpoint. Also, from the standpoint of the increasing importance of the Arctic Ocean with our Polaris missile, we've got to control the Arctic at stake. This is the Mediterranean was in World War II. So
this would be a real offensive base as well for us.
Well, yes, it can very well be an offensive base. In fact, I like to think of it as a missile platform. You know, our range of our weapons today, missiles, are fantastic. They've reduced the world, really. The world itself is going to be a battlefield. Any previous war, we've had selected areas, but in this particular, should we ever have another war, the entire world is going to be involved because our weapons can travel any part of them practically. So with this shorter distances to Eurasia from Alaska, it becomes an ideal missile platform, in effect, for offensive bases.
Well, could you use it as a staging or an area for the Army to assemble and take
yes, very definitely.
Actual move from here onto another...
Very definitely, yes.
Well, your men, I've seen them training, and I know they're well trained, but flying over this territory, I've seen some of the most barren and mountainous, cold-looking tundra and mountains that I've ever seen. Is the Army now capable of actually conducting combat operations in an area like this?
That's a good question. It's like this one, do we have enough forces? Yes, the Army can conduct operations in an area such as this. Korea, in effect, is very similar to the mountainous terrain here.
Of course, in Korea, when our troops first arrived there, they didn't do very well in the mountains and in the cold.
That's true.
I mean, geography was against them.
Yes, that's correct. We have considerable need for improvement in our equipment, specialized vehicles for moving overland. Areas of that type, there's a considerable area in which we've got to improve our facilities and our equipment and our gear. But should war come, the Army is prepared to fight and can operate in this terrain.
A former war correspondent remembers that in the past 15 years, there have been many wars fought by armies, not with nuclear weapons, but by men with rifles and mortars in land such as this. I wanted to see what the Alaska Command, and the top command is completely integrated between our services, was doing to train men to fight in these terrible mountains. You are seeing Army men doing what is called rappelling, learning how to help one another go down a cliffside. Air Force men who fly over the Arctic go to a special school, learn how to keep alive in ice and snow at 60 below if they parachute down. And they do learn to survive in the Arctic. Now, this is an Army company camping out in a training area, and they're learning techniques that could someday save their lives. The training instructors were just as tough as any sergeants I remember in World War II over those obstacle courses, whether it was falling down a cliff or climbing back or double timing up a mountain. They could lead the young fellows 10 years younger until their tongues hung out. But that's what good sergeants, of course, are expected to be able to do. Before we went to Alaska, all of us thought of our second newest state as bristling with long-range rockets, packed with bombers, in fact, an offensive outpost of the North American continent. Looking up from the city of Anchorage, you can see the light on a mountaintop that everyone knows is one of the Nike missile sites guarding Elmendorf Air Base and Fort Richardson. But such rockets, the Nikes, one can find them in Westport, Connecticut, Long Island, or around any major city where an air base exists. I don't know just how far the Nike will knock down an unfriendly plane, but it's simply a defense weapon to protect an air base from attack, certainly not an offensive weapon. Nice weapon to have around. You think some aircraft are going to come over and drop those irritating high explosive bombs on your base, those bombs that so many of us experienced here or there around the world. And no doubt, most of us feel that we're just that little bit safer when we know that a Nike base is nearby. Nike looked as though it meant business, but I knew that Nike did not have the punch. It could not hurt anything except a nearby aircraft. I had thought, coming up to Alaska, that I was going to find the big boys, the ballistic missiles that can make the long flight, but they do not exist. With 40,000 or so military men and their dependents near Anchorage, the Military Air Transport Service Terminal is a busy place. MATS is probably one of the most efficient transport organizations in the world, and I've flown in a lot of them. In fact, I have flown with MATS ever since the Berlin airlift in 1948. But anybody who has flown in a U.S. Air Force plane and seen the Soviet Union off the wingtip knows that something more than simple transport is needed. The Military Air Transport Service can supply Berlin with coal and food, or if it's called upon, it can lift troops from every continent down to some such place as the Congo, with all the incredible organization that such an operation requires. But when I went up to Alaska, I was looking for the punch, the ability of the United States to strike out in offense, and I did not find it. The big air base at Anchorage, Elmendorf, does have bombers once in a while. The Strategic Air Command uses the base as it uses bases in many parts of the world. The big bombers fly in. They're not under command of the Alaska Defense Command or the Alaska Air Command. They stay a while, then take off for some base halfway around the world, perhaps. Here today, Colorado tomorrow, perhaps Libya the next day. But these aircraft are not a permanent ready defense of the strategically important northwest shoulder of the continent. We do have fighters at Elmendorf. The pilots are ready to go in a practice scramble, or when some unidentified aircraft comes winging toward the area. In the control booth, officers are guiding the fighters toward the plane that has not yet been identified. But the shortcomings of even these sleek jets are apparent when one considers the fact that they are so few that only a handful of them can be kept in the air at any one time. That fields with runways long enough for jets are few and far between in Alaska. And from their ordinary bases, the range of these fighters is too short to take them out to all our Alaska frontiers, especially that border we share with the Soviet Union. Lieutenant General Frank Armstrong, renowned bomber commander of World War II, is commanding general of the Alaska Defense Command, with all Alaskan Air Force, Army, and Navy units in his integrated force. And I visited his chief of staff, Brigadier General F.R. Zerath, and asked him about Alaska's defenses.
Well, yes, Mr. McVeigh, we're living in an age of changing concepts and rapidly developing technology, and viewpoints and positions and thinking change. And I would say we're in one of those transition eras right now when the importance of missiles and their long-range projection only adds to the potential of Alaska in a strategic sense.
Well, could Alaska in any way substitute for our present missile bases and strategic air bases abroad, that is, in foreign countries? We have a good many of these bases, and yet they seem to be sometimes threatened politically.
Yes, as a matter of fact, this is one of the great features that stresses the vital importance of Alaska in the strategic role. Its territory of immense size, 1/5 the size of the United States. It has topography that provides a certain amount of natural hardening, and perhaps most important of all is the fact that we control it. It's our territory. Furthermore, it doesn't have a heavy industrial complex vital to our economy of our country. It doesn't have a heavy population density, and the lines of communication are such that they are currently under our own control. I would say that it would play an increasing important role as the prospects of losing bases overseas and other areas occur. And I note very recently that the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Gates, made a statement to the effect that our overseas bases are very vital for the maintenance of a forward strategy. Therefore, we feel that Alaska has an extremely important part to play in the future, more so than ever before.
I have found many fewer weapons here for defense than I'd expected. It has been reported in
papers back home that there are 30-odd fighters, and you can keep 6 fighters up in the air at any one time. And is there any explanation for this giving up of airfields and the sort of light armament, light defensive armament that you seem to have here to the casual visitor?
Well, of course, that's a good question. It's a very powerful question. There are projections of our thinking at higher levels that are done in the development of projection into 5-year and 10-year periods ahead. And let us put this perhaps in the category of the fact that we are, elsewhere decisions are being made that foresee projections of the replacement of manned aircraft in certain areas with missiles. Now, this might be one of the premeditating causes or reasons for these changes. We here feel very strongly that there should be a concentration of power here to give it that true value of a bastion, as I mentioned before, that we haven't always been consulted precisely as to what we whether we agree with these certain decisions, but that's immaterial. The main point is that the Commander-in-Chief of Alaska has very definitively expressed his views as to the amount of defensive armament and personnel, troops and equipment that should be provided for this area, and we're quite confident that these views will receive the emphasis that they deserve.
It did seem to me that flying over Cape Prince of Wales and seeing Russia off on the left, that the Soviet Union and the United States were very close together.
Yes, I think one of our senators described it the other day as we're practically in eyeball-to-eyeball contact with each other.
The general's comment that here in Alaska, the United States and the Soviet Union are eyeball to eyeball reflects the strategic position of this 49th state. Whether the strategic possibilities are being fully exploited is highly questionable. One can only hope that the failure to make this part of the world a strong point on the flank of current East-West tensions will not prove a military and political disaster for the free world. This is John McVane in Alaska.
This is National Educational Television.